Today, I'm excited to be bringing to you on this countdown to graduation one really important step when it comes to job searching, which is interviewing. In some of our previous workshops, we've talked about how to build your LinkedIn profile. We've talked about how to start your resume and to get that going online. And really, the resume is going to be the tool that gets you the interview, but it's the interview that actually gets you the job. So it's important you can have a perfect resume, but really practicing those interviewing skills and feeling confident going into the interview is going to be the thing that really opens up that new opportunity for you. So today we're going to be focusing, as you are on your countdown to graduation or into a next season of life. Maybe this is an interview that you were expecting. Maybe this is an interview you weren't expecting and there were some unanticipated changes in the job search right now. Well, just know that we're here in Career Services to help make sure that you are confident in your knowledge and in your skills to be able to move forward successfully. So today I want to start just by showing you where you can get resources from the Career Services office at Southern Wesleyan. So you can start by going to SWU.edu/career services. This is our home base. And anything related to job searching, we're updating right here on our website. We've got events coming up. And as we're talking about interviewing today, even this summer, we have virtual career fairs that are coming up. We have a career fair already scheduled in October. And what we're talking about today as it relates to interviewing is going to be a great way for you to prepare for these events so that you feel ready to have those conversations with employers. I also encourage you to check out any of our social media. That's where we're highlighting and even linking on our Facebook page, especially some of these workshops that we'll be talking about today. So if you didn't get a chance to join us live today, you can always follow up and watch these videos by following us on Facebook or Instagram. So what I'd like to highlight, and actually this workshop that I'm getting to, all of our resources you can get to right here on the left where it says resources for students and alumni. I've got a lot of the tools that we talked about last week as it relates to getting your resume ready and uploading that resume into our online system. You can get all of that in our resources for students, alumni, and typically you do need to work on that resume and have that ready before the interview because as we'll talk about in this workshop, you need to know yourself. You need to know the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that you want to highlight in an interview. And so getting that resume ready is going to be a good first step. But once you have that resume completed and you've written down the summary of what are your knowledge, skills, and abilities, and then you've done some research to where you know the type of industry, the type of company that you're going to be a good fit for, you can see all kinds of additional resources in these drop-down guides. And I'm going to start here with resume and interviewing resources. And this SWU interviewing workshop right here is what I'm going to be walking through a little bit today. So I'm excited to be highlighting for you some of the resources that we have at the Career Resources office. And if I could just give you an overview of some of the things that we can do to help you is looking for where do I initiate that job search. I think sometimes when students have a resume, they just upload it into a job board like Indeed, and they just wait. They wait for that perfect job to come open, or they might wait for somebody to reach out to them. And so one of the things that I want to highlight is that these interviews can take place at a career fair, like I mentioned from our events. These interviews can take place even in a non-formal way, just through friends and family members that you're connecting with, people at church. So you always want to be ready to be talking a little bit about what you have to offer an employer because you never know when that opportunity, that warm contact is going to help open a door for a job opportunity for you. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the most frequently asked questions that come up in an interview, some of the things that you should be researching about the employer, and then also think about the kind of questions that you can ask as well. And so one of the things I do want to highlight for you, and after we get through some of our workshop, is to know how do I practice some of these interviews. When it comes to interviewing is kind of like riding a bike or playing an instrument. You don't really get better at interviewing unless you practice it. And so you can think about how to have a good interview, how to answer a question all day long. You could think about it, but you don't really improve that skill until you practice it. So there's a couple of tools I want to highlight for you, and some of these will actually only be available a little bit longer, a couple more months in CareerBeam, our online tools. And so you want to make sure to take advantage of that quickly. We do have a virtual mock interview system that you can really take advantage of. And also SWU Career Link is where you'll upload your resume and how you can apply and start to get connected to jobs and internships. So these are some of the main tips that I want to highlight for you when it relates to interviews. First, you want to use stories because those are memorable. You know, if somebody you are talking with just is listing out a bunch of facts, it's hard to connect with them. And so if you can talk about real life circumstances that you had in your past to highlight the skills that you have, those are always going to be more memorable. Always putting those pieces together. I like to say a resume is like a puzzle piece. Your resume is one side of the puzzle, but the job description, the company, The graduate school, that's the other side of the puzzle. And you need to very easily put those pieces together for them. The same rule applies in an interview. If you don't know that job description, you're not exactly sure what they need for the job, then it's going to be really hard to bring up the knowledge and the skills that you have that relate to it. So it's important for you to do your homework before the interview. Building rapport with the employer, and that's just learning how to take it easy, be a little less formal so that you can get to know the employer a little bit. People want to hire people that they like. And so you might even be the best fit for the job. You might have great academics, great skills, great experience. But if you don't mesh with the team, if you don't interact with the people in the room in a positive way, it's going to be really hard for them to want to hire you, to connect with you. Always being positive, and we'll talk about some of the scenarios that you might want to bring up in an interview, but probably aren't the most appropriate thing to do. And then being brief, making sure that you're not talking on for 4, 5, 6 minutes about the same question. And if you start to see them kind of phasing out, the eyes kind of glazing over, then you know that that's the time you need to move on to the next question. So again, just a reminder to use stories. And in this paragraph, I want you to look at the STAR acronym: situation, task, action, and results. This is a strategy that you can use for your resume to write a good action bullet, but this is also a good strategy for you to use in an interview. So let's say, for example, you want to highlight the fact that you have conflict management skills. That's one of your top 3 to 5 skills. So to tell a story about that, you could talk about S, a situation that you've been in. So the situation might be, over last summer, I was a camp counselor. I had to oversee a cabin of 12 teenage girls in a cabin room. So T stands for task or goals. And so what was it? What were you trying to accomplish for those group of girls in that cabin situation? So it could be, my task or my goal was to get this group of 12 girls from all over the states to be able to mesh with one another, to be able to communicate and to treat each other respectfully, even though we're in close, confined quarters. And then A would be the actions that you take. So it might be at the beginning of the week, you really play some games so girls get to know one another, so that no one feels left out, that you teach them how to communicate with one another. Maybe you have some guidelines that you have them write out ahead of time, things that they agree to in case there is a conflict in the cabin. And then R is the results. And that's something that a lot of people leave out of an interview or of a resume, is that they don't actually talk about the results. And so you might even use a specific story. You could say, intervened in a conflict between 2 students relating space or about quiet time, and came up with a solution so that both sides felt listened to and heard and understood, and was able to resolve that conflict quickly. And so that's a STAR story. You're actually giving a real example of how you've used a skill that you want to highlight. So if they ask you in an interview, you said you had conflict management, tell me something about that. You have a good STAR story. And I would encourage you to write those down. Make sure that you have that down on paper so that you're ready. And you don't need to memorize that word for word. You don't need to be reading it, but it's good for you to think about it in a way that I can tell this story. It has a good beginning, middle, and end. I like to say you kind of tie up that story with a bow so that they get the gist of the skill that you had pretty quickly. 2, relating that to the position. And as I mentioned, that puzzle piece, you could talk about all kinds of stories, but unless it specifically relates to the job that you're interested in, then why would they hire you if that's not really a connection for them? So make sure that you read the job description before the interview. Make sure you really understand the company, the organization, their values, so that the stories that you bring up, the knowledge and the skills that you bring up and talk about, those are actually related to the job requirements. Also building rapport, and one of those things is just being able to ask some non-formal questions. So tell me a little bit about how you got started here. How long have you been working here? What is it about this organization that you enjoy the most? What advice would you have for someone to be the most successful in their first 90 days here? So those are the types of things that could get you connected to them. Of course, you want to keep it professional. You don't want to ask too many personal questions, but I do think it's good to get to know the interviewer a little bit. Ask them about things that are topics that are not hot topics like politics or even religion. Those aren't necessarily things you want to bring up in an interview, but asking them about their favorite sports team or asking them about recent news or things that are happening in the area. If you're aware of some of the things that are happening with that company, you can chat to them about that. So it's important to just know the company a little bit, be familiar with their products and services so that it doesn't sound like you're just walking in off the street and you have no idea who they are. You really want to do a little bit of homework ahead of time. And you can always research these employers on LinkedIn. So you can search, if you know who your interviewer is going to be, make sure to look them up and follow them on LinkedIn. You could see their background, see that they worked somewhere else that you were familiar with, or maybe you both went to a certain conference or something like that. You could always make those connections that way. And then finally, be positive. Make sure that you're not bringing up negative stories. If somebody says, tell me about conflict management, you don't want to talk about a conflict necessarily that you've had with someone where it turned out really poorly and somebody got fired. You don't ever want to badmouth an employer or a previous employer or boss, even if that's something that you feel like they were in the wrong and you're trying to explain that as much as possible. If there's anything that's negative, and sometimes this comes out if they ask you things like, tell us about a weakness, or why did you leave your last job? If it didn't finish very well, to say, I was learning a lot about the values of the organization and kind of the directions that they were headed, and I felt I had kind of gone as far as I could go with that company and with that organization, and I knew it was time for me to move on to something that was going to grow a little bit more aligned with the direction that I wanted to be headed. So you, again, try to say things that are in a positive way to spin that. And even if they talk about weaknesses, like what is your greatest weakness, you don't ever want to talk negatively about an experience, something that really was a big character flaw. You might say, one of the things that I struggle with sometimes is perfectionism. So I've learned on teams that it's hard for me to let go, to delegate things, because I always want things, I feel really strongly that things need to have an excellent value. But I've learned over time that groups actually function the best when we're able to leverage the strengths of everyone on the team. And so I've learned how to focus on what my strengths are, to be able to delegate things that are strengths of other people, and to be able to let go of the things that are going to allow other people to step up and really take advantage of the team. So you're being honest about what you feel is a weakness, but you're always kind of spinning that in a way of what you've learned or how that team can continue to grow. Always making sure, again, 2 minutes, 2 minutes is probably as long as you want to be in answering a question. If it looks like you're off and you find that you're on this tangent and you're not connecting to what the employer asked, always stop and say, you know what, I want to come back. Have I answered the question in what you needed? Is that what you were looking for? Or if you need to restate a question, but to say, as you start to read that body language, make sure to be brief. So these are some very common interview questions that come up. Things like, tell me about yourself. What's your greatest strength or weakness? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And why should we hire you? These are very typical questions. So we're going to take a quick look at each one of these. The tell me about yourself question really is something that you want to practice. And I'm going to give you a bit of a script and just a couple of slides to help you know what are some of the things that I say. How could I fill in the blanks for that? You don't want to go into your whole life story. You don't want to tell everything about your life, every personal quality about yourself. And typically, too, I would suggest you don't necessarily want to lead with things that are related to family history, even marriage status, things about your kids. In your job, you really want to focus on things that are professionally related. And so you want to connect that to your recent work experience or your recent educational experience. But I'm going to show you a bit in a script of what are some of the things that you want to pull out on that. But you definitely don't want to go down a line of talking about your recent medical history or anything like that. You want to keep it brief and keep it professional. And then, as we mentioned before about your greatest strengths and weaknesses, one of the biggest problems with this question, if somebody says, tell us about a weakness, and they say, I don't think I have any. I can't really think of anything right now. That's actually probably the only wrong way to answer that question, or one of the most wrong ways. Everyone obviously has weaknesses and blind spots. And so think about the things where you've had growth. Think about things where you've been able to make some changes. Maybe it's time management, or maybe it's procrastination, or maybe it's something even related, as we mentioned, to being a perfectionist. Or for me, one of the things that I often say is I can be detail-oriented and sometimes too detail-oriented. So I'm good at working at a team that helps me see the big picture, keep focused on the most important things. So knowing that about yourself is good, but then also saying, here's how I've been working on it, or here's how I leverage the team to help me overcome that. Now, where you see yourself in 5 years, and I think this is important, even though you don't have all the answers, it's important to say what you're aspiring to. And even with this job, you don't want to just say, I'm looking for any job. You want to say, why would you pick this job? So even if this seems like an entry-level job, after completing this position, I really hope to grow in a role that will give me more responsibility or an opportunity to learn. Or in 5 years, I really hope that I could move up in a management type of role, or I'd like to be pursuing additional education. So have an idea of this is how I'm going to contribute to this company or this organization, but then I also know that I want to move on to this next phase, or how I even want to grow as an individual. So it's good to be thinking through how you can expand that training or that responsibility. Now, why should we hire you? Don't go right back to, I got my degree, I've got the job skills and knowledge. Try to think about something that is the biggest accomplishment for you, kind of that wow factor. So go back through all of your star stories that you've written down on paper and think about what's the one that I'm the most proud of, and that most relates to this company or to this organization. More times than not, everyone's going to have a very similar degree. If you're applying to a job that requires a certain degree that you have, then anyone that's applying to that job has your degree. So you can't just talk about, I have my bachelor's degree, or I'm really interested in this company. You really want to say, what is it that makes me stand out, and why do I think that's something that makes me a good fit for this company right now? Again, reiterating the things that you researched about the company so that they know, I don't just want any job, I want to work with this job. I want to work in this company and with this organization. You all are aligned with my values, aligned with where I see myself headed. And so this is really, I think, what would be a great fit for us together. Now, we're not talking about career fairs today, but I do want to bring up the fact that attire is really important, critically important, because many times that's the first impression that you make with an employer, and that's the last impression you leave them with. And so you've got to make sure that nothing that you're wearing, whether it's your attire, your grooming, your preparation, even whether or not your outfit has wrinkles in it, is going to make an impression. And so it's important to make sure that you're picking something that's not distracting, that the focus of the interview is going to be on your knowledge, your skills, your abilities for the job, not anything else that could be distracting to that. So these are just a couple tips of what typical interview attire is. Now, sometimes different industries, you might have a little bit differences. If you're working with a more informal organization where they wear t-shirts and shorts to work, then maybe you could dress that down a little bit, but still you need to be dressing up at least a step above where the people in the room are. So if everyone in the room is wearing a t-shirt and shorts, then you should at least be wearing a collared shirt or a nice blouse and dress pants. You may not have to wear the full business suit, but I would also encourage you only have one chance to make a good impression. So this is where wearing that business suit is going to be really important to get started. Also, I would encourage you, if you are even doing things that are, actually, I'm going to come back to this attire. If you are in an interview that's virtual, we're going to talk about this in a minute, I would still encourage you to wear the full outfit, wear the business suit. Don't take for granted that just because you may be doing a phone or virtual interview, that attire doesn't matter. Especially in a virtual interview, your attire really is going to matter. So again, take the time to make that good, positive first impression. Now, this was the 1-minute commercial that I was talking about, and whether it relates to, and as we come up to career fairs in June or in October, it's going to be really important for you to be able to say this very quick 30-second, 1-minute commercial about yourself. And so this is just a good script to get started with. So I'm just going to show you an example here. Hi, my name is, and you say your name. I'm a senior majoring in exercise science. I'm interested in sports. I enjoy talking with people about fitness and playing team sports. Really being involved in athletics has allowed me to develop my teamwork and my leadership skills. I'd really like to apply that, what I've learned as a sales associate, to contribute to the success of the store. And so it's quick, it's 30 seconds, but you can fill in those blanks about your major, your background, and that's what someone, even in a virtual job fair, or as you're first introducing yourself to someone, or tell us a little bit about yourself, this is some of the content that you could start in that very first tell me about yourself question. There's all kinds of things that employers use to evaluate candidates. Of course, first of all, that resume is what's going to get your foot in the door, what you're wearing, your attire that we talked about, the type of eye contact that you have. And again, even if you're in a virtual meeting, it's going to be important to keep that frame. As you can see, even what I'm in is boxed from my shoulder to my head, just the 2/3 of my body. And I am actually looking at the camera. So you want to focus, even as you're talking to groups in a virtual meeting, you want to focus on that eye contact as much as you can to the camera. Handshakes are something we'll talk about in a little bit, but that might be something that changes a little bit in the next month or year or so, as we're getting back into getting into social gatherings again. So that might be something that you just have to follow the lead of the company or the organization. And even nonverbal cues like your posture and the clothing that you wear. So we're going to talk about that. Making sure as well that other sources that you have, such as your online accounts, or something that portray a professional, a professionalism, a professional brand as well. So you want to pay attention to that. These are some of the top skills that very frequently the National Association of Colleges and Employers has told us these are the types of skills that employers are looking for in an interview. So it's really important, if you don't have any star stories written down yet, start here. These are the types of skills: communication skills, honesty and integrity, interpersonal skills, strong work ethic, that teamwork, being analytical, being detail-oriented. If you don't have a star story about those, it's time to write that down, because these are skills that are transferable. Almost every employer is looking for these types of skills. So that's the stories that you want to tell. Again, we talked about resumes last time, but in this workshop, if you click to it from our website, you'll learn some more about resumes as well. So dress and grooming, again, is really one of the most important things that you can do to make a good, positive first impression. You can see some of these percentages of how much impact, 90%, that personal appearance makes a really impact on the interview. So even taking a look at this, if you just take a very brief look at some of these pictures, what's your first impression of this? You know, if you see somebody on the left, sure, maybe they're a nice person, but they really didn't take the time. They just pulled that shirt out of the bottom of their closet. They may only have one collared shirt, and they did not prepare for this interview at all, versus someone that you can really tell has taken care of their attire, their grooming, to really look professional. Or even things, especially for females, it's important with professionalism that modesty is really important, whether that's the length of your skirts or dresses. So make sure that modesty is going to be a key thing. You don't want anything to distract from the interview. You want them to be focusing on you and your skills for the job. You don't want anything that you're wearing to be a distraction. As we mentioned, again, posture and good eye contact, making sure to use smiling. A lot of times, even on an interview, it's easy to just look deadpan in a virtual interview especially. And so make sure that you're making the effort to nod your head, to smile, to interact with others when they're talking to you. Now, again, the handshake, and this might be something before the interview, I would actually ask this in an email to someone. I would say, you know, we have an interview coming up. I'm really excited. I wanted to ask you one question. I realized with COVID-19 that there may be changes to procedures for handshakes, but I just wanted to make sure I was following policy for your company or for your organization. Could you fill me in as to what some of the guidelines your company are doing right now? So you don't want to, you know, if somebody's shaking your hand, to totally like back off and not shake their hand and make for that like awkward conversation. But then also I think it's good ahead of time to let them know those are things that you're mindful of. You're, you know, trying to be cautious and following safe and healthy guidelines as it relates to just safety and social distancing. So make sure to do a little bit of research and try to follow up with that company ahead of time before you get into the interview and it becomes something awkward. Now, again, your nonverbal things like crossing your arms, things like leaning back in your chair, getting way too comfortable in a setting, even things like taking off your coat if you're in an interview room before they've given you permission. You can always ask that. You know, it's a little warm in here. Would you mind if I took my jacket off? But always following the lead of the people in the room. That's always a good rule of thumb. If you're not sure exactly where to sit, always follow that lead of the people in the room. Now, right now, because so much of our interviews might be happening over the phone or over interview, it's more important than ever to make sure that your digital persona is as squeaky clean as it can be. So make sure the words, even tweeting, things that you're saying, comments that you're saying, what would people say if they Googled you? What would people see on your LinkedIn account? What would people see on some of your accounts that are out there on Instagram, the pictures that you're posting? Make sure that there's not anything that's going to get you kicked out of the running just because people can do research, and those are public platforms. So those are not things that recruiters are going to ignore if they see some of that. Also, because so much of our communication is happening over email or text, it's going to be very, very important for you to make sure that you're following proper grammar, that you're writing complete sentences. So you're not going to be using the acronyms or things that you might be using in a text and texting with friends. You're going to be making sure, just like when you're writing a paper, that you're using complete sentences, good grammar, and spelling. So one of the things I wanted to highlight to you, again, going back, these are all in our career resources, but for resources for students and alumni, I want to highlight that through CareerBeam right now is going to give you some really good tools to practice these interviewing online. So you could go to Resources for Students Alumni and visit CareerBeam. If you don't have an account, you can see the PDF guide on how to get started for that. But I wanted to show you, once you log into CareerBeam, there's actually a place for you to practice. And as I mentioned, when it comes to interviewing, really practice makes, I wouldn't say perfect because we're always improving our interviewing skills, but practice makes progress. And if you're not comfortable or not confident in your interviewing skills right now, then you can be. You need to keep practicing. Put some time into it right now. So if you are done with school, you just had your countdown to graduation and you don't have all those hours of coursework, now you need to be putting hours into your job search. You need to be putting hours into practicing the skills that are going to make you competitive in this job search. And interviewing, again, is typically the doorway to get to that job. So once you're in CareerBeam, if you click getting the job and going down to interview preparation, there is a number of different sample interviews where you can record a practice interview. And so once and there's all kinds of instruction on here how to get started, the types of interviews that you're going to select. You can just select a general interview up to 3 questions and then name that. You can see there's all these different practice interviews that I've had. And another thing I wanted to point out, once you're into CareerBeam, if you click this Getting the Job and Interview Preparation is a section that you can really spend a lot of time researching. They've got great types of interview examples. So here for the phone interview, you can read about how to get ready for that phone interview. What are some of the things that are a little bit different than face-to-face, but this is definitely ways where you can practice and prepare for that interview. And there's a whole interview questions library that has tips and strategies for a number, hundreds of different questions that could come up in an interview and giving you some tips of how you could answer that. Another thing is the video interviews. So making sure that you're preparing, getting ready for that interview. And I would just say preparation is going to be a key thing. So making sure just your camera's working, your sound is working, there's no distractions in the house. You've shut the door, you locked the door, you've let everyone in the house know I'm about to have an interview. Preparation is really, really important before your interview. Making sure that the lighting, that there's nothing distracting in your background. These are all very important things as you are going to be having probably a number of phone or virtual interviews to be thinking about some of these ways to prepare. And during the interviews, again, you'll be asked very similar questions, so the more you can prepare and write down those star stories, the better. But it might be good if you're in a swivel chair or you're in a rocking chair to make sure that you're not doing anything that's distracting, making sure that the ceiling fan around you isn't going like crazy in the background, or making sure that you're making good eye contact with the camera, elevating your computer so that it's actually eye level and you're not looking down or looking up, or that the camera's looking at the ceiling. All of that makes a really big impression when it is a virtual interview. So make sure to log into CareerBeam and read some of these tips for the virtual interview. And I'm going to be sending or linking some handouts after this workshop so that you can go back and review some of those tips. And the last thing I wanted to highlight, there's tons of different suggestions and videos that are out there, but this one right here, the Skype interview tips, and I know we're kind of talking more often than not about Zoom than Skype, but these are going to be, this is one of my very favorite videos that's out there that helps you prepare for a Zoom interview. It talks about sound, talks about lighting, talks about what's where, it talks about background, what can be distracting for you back there. So it's really important to, again, take the preparation so that your virtual interviews are something that you feel really confident about. If you have any questions about anything that we talked about today, one of the best first steps that you can do is just go to our website, swu.edu/career-services. You can see the button here to schedule an appointment, and I will be glad to set up a time to talk to you about your interview, to practice virtual interview questions, to meet one-on-one in Zoom meetings, to talk through some of the questions that you feel the most unconfident about. And I really want to make sure that as you go through these tools and these resources, that you have everything you need to be a confident job seeker, to be a competitive job seeker. And this is going to be a season where it is going to be really competitive. In the next 6 months to a year, you're competing not only with recent graduates, but you're competing with alumni that might be back in the job search. So taking time to do these skills is going to be critical for you to succeed in that next transition in life. And just know that all of our staff here at Southern Wesleyan and the Career Services Office are here to help you do that. So thank you. On your countdown to graduation, we hope that these interview tips are something that you can move forward and know that you can do it. And we're looking forward to those successes that are to come.